Jake, after 17 years, we're eliminating your position, my boss said flatly, like he was commenting on the weather. No hesitation, no build-up. Just a cold, clean cut. Clean out your desk by the end of the day. That was it. No preamble, no gentle letdown. Just a sentence that changed everything. My name's Jake Wilson. I'm 54 years old. And up until that Monday morning, I was the senior systems analyst at Meridian Technologies, right in the heart of Columbus, Ohio. For nearly 2 decades, I lived and breathed that company. I watched it evolve. From the screechy dial-up days to sleek cloud-based infrastructures, through it all, I stayed. Quietly dependable, unshakably consistent. I was the guy behind the curtain making sure the machine never broke down. 3 different CEOs came and went. New managers, new faces, office rebrands, logo redesigns. They all passed through like seasons. But I remained, training every fresh hire, recovering every lost file, burning through weekends and holidays while everyone else logged off, never once asking for a raise, never chasing a title. I didn't need applause, I just wanted things to run right. So when Daniel, the current boss, called me into his office that morning, with Vanessa from HR already seated across from him, I knew. I could feel the shift. The atmosphere had changed weeks ago. Quiet whispers in the hall, last-minute meetings I wasn't invited to. Something was coming. I understand, I said, nodding once. Then I stood up, walked out, and left them in silence. No shouting, no bargaining, just quiet acceptance. Dignity intact. Back at my desk, I started to pack my things methodically, like I was wrapping up a project, a photo of my family, the chipped coffee mug my son made in ceramics class during his sophomore year, a little cactus I bought 17 years ago on my first week, somehow still alive under the flickering fluorescent lights. Around me, the younger employees kept stealing glances, then snapping their eyes back to their screens. I'd trained most of them myself. Bright kids, sharp minds, but they had no idea what really lived inside our systems. The hidden architecture, the custom tools, the little quirks only time could teach. They didn't know the deep layers I'd built into our software or where the real administrative access lived. 3 levels down, protected, forgotten by most. Except me. Bethany from marketing stopped by, her heels clicking anxiously against the tile. She looked pale, like someone had just told her a family member got bad news. "Jake, I just heard," she said, her voice tight with disbelief. "This is ridiculous. You built this place." I gave a half smile, a shrug. Companies change direction. But without any warning? After everything you've done? Her voice rose, catching the attention of a few nearby coworkers. "It's fine," I said softly. It wasn't fine, but I wasn't going to create a scene. Not for their entertainment. I finished packing. Box in hand, I walked through the corridor one last time. Daniel was standing outside his office, arms folded, watching me go. No nod, no handshake. Just making sure I left like I was some potential threat. He had no idea, no one did. What they failed to see, what they'd never taken the time to understand, was that I had quietly become the most vital person in the entire building. Not because I was flashy or brilliant, but because I was meticulous. I kept track of everything. I designed systems with integrity. I'd set up detailed audit trails years ago at the legal department's request during an old internal scandal. The same trails that tracked every unauthorized access attempt in the company, flagged suspicious logins, and kept everything honest. And I had copies. Not maliciously, just smart practice. Clean, encrypted backups, stored off-site. In my car, actually, waiting. I sat behind the wheel for a few minutes, staring up at the 12-story glass and steel tower where I'd spent most of my adult life. So many days blurred together in that building. Late nights, impossible deadlines, quiet triumphs no one ever saw. I'd just been erased like a typo? But this story wasn't over yet. The security badge I'd just surrendered, it had been renewed 16 times. A small plastic card, but to me it held the weight of a lifetime. I started the engine, pulled out of the lot, and drove home like it was any other day. But it wasn't. Wednesday was going to be interesting, and they had no idea. I'd been at Meridian since the company was barely more than a startup. Just 2 floors tucked into a nondescript business park, surrounded by chain restaurants and overgrown shrubs. Back then it was scrappy, ambitious. We were building something from the ground up. Olivia, my daughter, was just starting kindergarten when I signed the employment contract. Now she was wrapping up graduate school with 2 degrees and a world ahead of her. The company grew and I grew with it, steadily, loyally. I'd turned down more lucrative offers over the years because, to me, loyalty still meant something. My wife Andrea used to joke that the servers were my second family. She wasn't wrong. I knew those systems more intimately than most people know their own homes. I could feel when something was wrong just by the hum of the machines, the lag in a process, the whisper of a backup server kicking in at an odd time. I had solutions for problems no executive ever knew existed. Quiet fixes, behind-the-scenes patches, the kind of under-the-hood knowledge that takes years to build, but just one bad decision to discard. The infrastructure I built, modular, resilient, adaptable, survived 3 company acquisitions, a dozen major innovations, and more tech revolutions than I could count. Management would get excited about the next big thing, pour resources into it, and then abandon it within months. But I kept the bones strong. Then Daniel arrived. He took over as my boss 5 years ago, a young, sharp-edged MBA type with a knack for dressing like he had something to prove. He called us IT resources instead of people. That said enough. He brought with him a wave of corporate jargon, streamlining efficiency, digital transformation, synergizing operations. All buzzwords. What it really meant was cuts. Reorgs doing more with fewer hands and less context. I tried to help at first. I really did. Sat down with him, walked him through the history of our systems, their logic, their evolution, the invisible threads that connected everything. But he never looked me in the eye. In meetings, he'd throw around phrases like future-proofing, while completely ignoring the guy who built the past he was trying to erase. 6 months ago, he brought in Jason Phillips, a consultant. The moment I saw him, I knew. Designer suit, confident stride, handshake like he practiced it in front of a mirror. His Stanford MBA was featured front and center on his LinkedIn profile. I didn't even need to look it up to know it was there. They'd whisper in conference rooms, close the door the second I walked by. The writing was on the wall. 3 months ago, I started noticing subtle changes. My access permissions began shifting. Not enough to set off alarms, just tweaks, quiet edits to my administrative rights. A few tools I couldn't access anymore. At first, I thought maybe it was a system glitch, but it kept happening. I could have raised a flag, but I didn't. Instead, I observed, took notes. Every change, every log entry, I documented it all. "You seem distracted lately," Andrea said one warm evening as we sat on the porch, nursing drinks in comfortable silence. I gave her a sideways glance, then sipped my beer. Just work stuff, changes, nothing I haven't seen before. But it was different. This wasn't just a shift in direction. I was being methodically pushed out. Meetings I once led were now stand-ups I wasn't even invited to. Project briefs and system upgrades that used to hit my inbox never showed up. Tasks I'd handled for years were quietly reassigned to junior team members. I was becoming invisible. Then I found it. It was almost by accident. I was running a routine security scan, one of those tasks no one else bothers with anymore. Background work, maintenance, but I still did it. That's when I saw something odd in our financial software. A pattern that didn't sit right. Recurring payments, regular transfers to a vendor I'd never heard of. Apex Solutions Group. Sounded legitimate at first, but when I looked it up, I found a red flag big enough to cover the entire company. It was registered just last year. The listed address? A UPS store in a strip mall. Not an office. Not a building. A mailbox. I dug deeper. The payments started small, easily overlooked, but month by month they were growing, steadily, deliberately. I didn't alert anyone, not yet. I made copies, screenshots, pulled records, quietly archived the logs, and then I kept watching. Because something was happening inside Meridian, and I wasn't going to be the only one walking out the door when it all came crashing down. Sometimes it's the quiet man in the corner who sees the most, precisely because everyone assumes he sees nothing. That invisibility they gave me, it became my shield, and now my advantage. The morning after they let me go, I sat in my home office just staring at my personal laptop. No alarm had pulled me out of bed, no rush to beat traffic, no inbox waiting to explode. Just stillness, and the heavy weight of finality pressing down on my shoulders. Andrea walked in silently, carrying a mug of coffee, and placed it beside me without saying a word. 19 years of marriage will teach you when to speak and when to just sit in the quiet. She knew this was one of those moments. "I'm heading to the store," she said softly after a few minutes. "Need anything?" I shook my head. Once I heard the front door close behind her, I leaned forward, unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk, and pulled out a flash drive. One of several I kept secured over the years. Company policy had always been firm, absolutely no transferring of data outside the system. But there had been exceptions. Years ago, when legal requested an internal audit protocol to track potential insider threats, I'd made it clear I needed offsite redundancy. They signed off without hesitation and then promptly forgot about it. I hadn't. I plugged in the drive. It blinked to life in my hand like an old friend. The files loaded quickly, compressed, encrypted, organized with obsessive precision. Years of internal emails, archived meeting notes, and financial reports most employees never even knew existed. I shouldn't have had access to half of what was in there, but over time the walls between systems blurred for me. I built the hallways, I kept the lights on, and there it was. A complete, unbroken paper trail of payments to Apex Solutions Group, nearly $1.8 million over the last 18 months. I followed the digital breadcrumbs, tracked the approval chain. Every transaction had passed cleanly through official channels, signed off at the highest level. And at the top of the stack, Brian Wilcox, our CFO. I kept digging, cross-referencing dates, matching invoice numbers to license renewals. That's when the pattern snapped into focus. The payments always coincided with legitimate expenses, renewals for system software we actually used across departments. But the amounts were off, inflated. Slightly at first, maybe 10%, then 15%, sometimes even 20%. Just low enough to fly under the radar, just high enough to accumulate into something ugly. I opened a business registry search on Apex Solutions Group. The listed owner? Thomas Wilcox. It only took a minute on social media to confirm what I already suspected. Thomas and Brian were family, brothers-in-law. Photos from barbecues, family reunions, a beach wedding. There they were, side by side, grinning like they'd already won. They were funneling money through a dummy vendor, skimming off the top with just enough subtlety to stay invisible. I leaned back in my chair, the realization settling into my bones. Not like a punch, not even like betrayal. Something colder, heavier, more clinical. It wasn't anger that rose up in me. It was focus. For 17 years, I was the fixer, the one who got called in when everything else failed. I protected systems. I solved problems. I kept the machine running. I was the guy who didn't make noise, didn't ask for recognition, didn't demand anything. I was the constant. And in return, they cast me aside like obsolete tech. My phone buzzed. A text from Steven, a junior analyst I'd mentored over the past 2 years. Hey, Jake. I just wanted to say I'm really sorry about what happened yesterday. It's not right. I stared at the message for a moment, thumb hovering over the keyboard, thinking about how much he reminded me of myself. Eager, loyal, willing to learn. Then I looked back at the files on my screen. They thought they'd gotten rid of me. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. Total BS what they did, the text read. Phillips is already moving into your old office. I set the phone down without responding. Everything fit now, perfectly. Every piece in its place. Daniel and the CFO hadn't just blindsided me, they needed me gone. Not because I was obsolete, but because I was in the way. Because I'd built the very systems that could expose them. They probably figured I'd disappear quietly, that once the badge was turned in and the desk cleared out, the evidence would vanish with me. Just another aging tech guy shoved aside before he could connect dots they assumed were scattered. They underestimated me. I opened my laptop, launched my email, and began drafting a message directly to the board of directors. Subject line, urgent, financial misconduct. My fingers flew across the keyboard, laying out everything I'd found. But just before hitting send, I paused. My finger hovered over the button. Too blunt, too easy to dismiss as the bitter ramblings of a terminated employee. No matter how right I was, they'd see it as noise. Emotional backlash. I didn't need emotion, I needed precision, leverage. Something so surgical and undeniable that no PR scrub or internal spin could bury it. I deleted the draft, closed the window, began forming a new plan. Tomorrow was Wednesday, board meeting day. A nice, polished quarterly update would be presented. Bonuses handed out. Smiles all around. Perfect timing. I closed the laptop and walked over to the living room window. The same window where I'd once watched my kids ride their bikes and shovel snow off the driveway. The neighborhood hadn't changed much, but I had. And for the first time since Monday, I actually smiled. Wednesday morning, I sat in my car across the street from Meridian's headquarters, just watching. It was strange being on the outside, watching the flow of employees enter through the revolving doors I'd walked through 1,000 times. People with earbuds in, coffee in hand, badge swipes, and polite nods. Routine, comfort, unaware of the storm about to hit. In the passenger seat sat my laptop, already logged in. I'd created the email account years ago, back when I was testing phishing vulnerabilities in the system, an address that looked like it belonged to the internal domain but wasn't listed in any directory, completely invisible to standard filters. At exactly 9:15 a.m., I made my first move, an email to Daniel. Subject, financial irregularities. Urgent review needed. The body contained a brief but detailed summary of the Apex payments. Not everything, just enough to make it credible, enough to rattle him. I intentionally left out the connection between Apex's registration and the Wilcox name. If Daniel was part of the scheme, the omission would make him panic. If he wasn't, it would prompt an investigation. Either way, I'd learn something. By 9:45, my phone rang. Daniel's number. I let it go to voicemail. His voice, when it came through, was clipped and shaky. Jake, we need to discuss your email immediately. Call me back as soon as possible. I didn't. Instead, I drove to a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town, ordered a black coffee, and set up at a corner table with my back to the wall, just in case. I refreshed my inbox. At 10:30, another email arrived. This one from Vanessa in HR. Mr. Wilson, we've received concerning communication from you that may violate your separation agreement. Please cease all contact with Meridian employees and remember your confidentiality obligations. Any further communications may result in legal action. So that was the play. Intimidation, isolation, threats. Try to shut me up before anyone else started asking questions. Except I never signed a separation agreement. They were bluffing. At noon, I drove to the bank, not to withdraw money, not to move accounts. I had something more valuable stored there, my safe deposit box. Inside was an older backup drive, a time capsule of sorts. One I hadn't touched in over a year, but it held crucial documentation that I'd kept separate from everything else for this exact kind of scenario. Back home, I loaded the contents onto a secure drive. Among the files were original versions of the security protocols I'd written, complete with access logs and administrative authorizations, digital fingerprints, complete with timestamps. And there it was. Brian Wilcox had personally submitted the request to expand his access privileges to the financial approval system, dated exactly 18 months ago, the same week the Apex payments began. I leaned back, the pieces snapping into place with terrifying clarity. By the time I checked my phone again, I'd missed 3 more calls. Daniel, Vanessa, and now Jason Phillips. I hadn't expected Phillips to get involved this quickly. That made things interesting. I logged into my personal email. New message flagged URGENT from Steven. Jake, they're saying you sent some crazy email about financial fraud. What's going on? People are whispering. Is it true? Whispers. That's where it always starts. But I wasn't here to whisper. I was here to light a fire. Phillips just called an emergency meeting, Steven messaged. Everyone's buzzing. They're pulling your access to everything, even old logs. Stuff we actually need to do our jobs. What the hell is going on? The poor kid, right in the crossfire. I typed a quick reply. Don't get involved, Steven. Just watch. They were panicking. That much was clear. When a system admin gets fired, you revoke real-time access. When you start erasing historical records, that's fear. That's scrambling to cover tracks. By 3 p.m., my home phone rang, a landline I hadn't used for anything but robocalls and the occasional dentist reminder in years. I picked up but didn't say a word. Jake, came the voice. Calm, crisp, rehearsed. It's Brian Wilcox. I think we need to talk. Of course we did. There's been a misunderstanding, he continued smoothly. These kinds of transition periods are often sensitive. If you've got questions about any of the company's finances, there are appropriate channels, like the board. I let a beat pass. Then why don't we go ahead and loop them in now? I said, my voice cool. I'm sure they'd be very interested in Apex Solutions Group and your brother-in-law. There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. I could almost hear the shift, his mask slipping. You're making a serious mistake, he said finally, voice flat. We can make this right, Jake. A generous severance, positive references, whatever you need. I didn't even flinch. Goodbye, Brian. I hung up. 10 minutes later, another email from Vanessa appeared. The severance offer, now double the original, came attached to a pristine agreement requiring full confidentiality about all Meridian matters, past and present. No further discussion, no admissions, just sign and disappear. They were still treating me like a problem to be paid away, still underestimating what I knew, who I was. They thought I wanted a check. They had no idea what I wanted. Thursday morning came like a switch flipping. The fog of emotion had burned off. What remained was sharp clarity, focus, purpose. I'd spent most of the night digging through the archive drives, files I hadn't thought about in years. Old project folders, audit trails, buried logs from internal systems that even IT leadership had forgotten existed. And with each click, the bigger picture came into focus. The Apex scheme wasn't some rogue operation. It wasn't even their first. 3 years ago, shortly after Brian was promoted to CFO, I'd noticed something strange, small at first. A consulting firm called Lakeside Business Solutions began appearing on disbursement reports, high-dollar payouts, vague services, strategic analysis, operational workflow review, forecast modeling. No one I asked had ever worked with them. No one had sat in meetings with their consultants. There were no decks, no deliverables, no records, just payments. So I followed the trail. Lakeside Business Solutions incorporated out of a shared office space in Dayton. No website, no staff directory. The business registration listed one name, Patricia Wilcox, Brian's wife. My pulse ticked up. I pulled every document I had. Invoices were padded, some duplicated with slight modifications, altered dates, reshuffled line items. The same grift, different shell company. Apex was just a version 2 of the same playbook. But then came the real discovery. Buried deep in old email archives was proof that Daniel hadn't just been vaguely aware of what was going on. He'd helped facilitate it. There were threads showing direct coordination between him and Brian. Notes about budget reallocation, departmental offsets, and incentivized efficiency proposals. I remembered how, under Daniel's leadership, our department, his department, had miraculously avoided the same budget cuts that gutted other teams. Marketing lost 12%. Facilities shrank. Even executive ops froze hiring. But IT, we got an increase, while I was still in charge of the systems. That same increase had been used to justify Daniel's hiring of Phillips. Now it all made sense. Daniel had been brought in after the last director, Mike Harmon, started pushing back. I remembered him. Honest guy, sharp, kind of rigid. He left to pursue other opportunities a month after submitting a formal inquiry into questionable vendor relationships. I pulled up his departure paperwork. No severance, no references. They had silenced him. I looked back at the name on the current board chair and started planning my next move. Even Jason Phillips wasn't just a bystander. His consulting firm had been brought on through a strange backdoor process, one that completely bypassed the usual procurement protocols I helped set up years ago. No bids, no reviews, no vetting. Just a fast-tracked approval buried under the guise of strategic transformation. His actual job? Not to modernize IT or to erase me, the only one likely to notice the quiet siphoning of funds. The entire scheme was almost impressive in how deceptively clean it looked. Create a handful of real vendors, provide legitimate services, mark up the invoices just enough to slip beneath audit thresholds, approve payments through insiders, split the excess. To any casual observer or even a diligent financial auditor, the services were real, the payments matched contracts, and nothing screamed fraud. But I'd seen the rhythm, the inflation, the timing. Over 3 years, they'd redirected just under $4.3 million into the pockets of relatives, shell companies, and quiet partnerships. I compiled everything. Spreadsheets showing the month-over-month increases, emails proving Brian's approvals, business filings tying companies like Apex and Lakeside directly to his family. Internal correspondence revealing Daniel's complicity, his selective budget changes, his shifting project assignments, his silence at key moments. Then I did something unexpected. I reached out to Robert Chen, a longtime board member I hadn't spoken to in years. We'd worked together once during a massive security overhaul, back when Meridian still cared about doing things by the book. He was semi-retired now, quiet, respected, the kind of man who actually read the audit reports. He picked up on the second ring. "Jake Wilson," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Been a long time. Heard you left Meridian?" "Not exactly by choice," I replied. "Robert, I need 15 minutes of your time. It's important." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "Is this about why Brian and Daniel have been pacing around like nervous cats since yesterday's board meeting?" "Probably. I always figured you were the one guy who knew where the bodies were buried," he said. "Where do you want to meet?" An hour later, we sat on a bench in a quiet park 3 miles from Meridian HQ. It was overcast, breezy, calm. I handed him a sealed envelope and a flash drive. "That's everything," I said. "Dates, documents, connections. I'm not looking for a job, not looking for hush money. I just want this in the right hands." He didn't open it right away, just looked at me, measuring. "Why me?" "Because you asked the hard questions. Because I've watched you sit through a 3-hour audit review and actually take notes. Because you don't play the game." He gave a slow nod, then slipped the envelope into his briefcase. "There's an emergency board session tomorrow. Finance committee, convenient timing." "I thought so. If this checks out," he said, standing, "there will be consequences. Serious ones. I'm counting on it." As I walked back toward my car, my phone buzzed with a message from Andrea. Some guy named Jason Phillips came by the house. Said it was urgent. I told him you were out. They were scrambling. Showing up at my door? That was desperation. Good. Later that afternoon, I received 2 emails from competing firms, both large, both direct competitors of Meridian. Each offered roles above what I held before, complete with hefty signing bonuses and relocation perks. Word had clearly spread. Jake Wilson was free and someone had made a mistake letting him go. I didn't respond. This wasn't about moving on. Not yet. That night, I'd logged into a secure access point using credentials that, due to their own sloppy handoff and poorly executed IT transition, should have been revoked by now. They weren't. Thanks for that, Jason. I accessed the company's email server one last time. The message was short, simple. Subject, before you approve. Q2 bonuses. Read this body. Attached is a summary of financial discrepancies involving vendor payments over the past 3 years. Please review before authorizing any distributions. Jake Wilson. I scheduled it to send at 8 a.m. sharp, just before the finance committee met to finalize executive bonuses. The full report was attached. Dates, transactions, names, connections, all of it. Friday morning broke clear and bright. I sat on the porch with a fresh cup of coffee, the scent of wet grass hanging in the air. No alarm, no tie, just stillness. A neighborhood waking up, unaware that a different kind of alarm had already been triggered. At exactly 8 a.m., the email deployed itself to every board member. By 8:17, my phone began to ring. Unknown numbers, board assistants, legal staff, probably PR damage control. I let them all go to voicemail. At 9 a.m., the Emergency Finance Committee meeting kicked off. Robert Chen would be there, the report in hand, watching each executive's reaction as the scope of it unraveled around them. 9:32 a.m. A text from Steven. Police are here. Wilcox and Daniel being questioned in conference rooms. Phillips looking sick. What did you do? I didn't reply. He'd find out soon enough. The wheels were turning, right on schedule. At 10 a.m., my phone lit up again, this time with a name I recognized. Patricia Graves. Meridian Legal, I answered. Mr. Wilson, she began, voice tight. This is Patricia Graves from Meridian's legal department. We need you to come in immediately to discuss the information you've provided to the board. I'm available by phone, I said, keeping my tone level. This really requires an in-person— No, it doesn't, I cut in. Calm, certain. Everything I know is in that report. Everything I have is backed up in multiple secure locations. If anything happens to me or my family, copies go directly to the SEC, IRS, and 3 media outlets. Automatically. Silence. Then, Mr. Wilson, the board is taking this extremely seriously. Several executives have already been placed on administrative leave pending formal investigation. They would appreciate your cooperation. I've cooperated fully, I said. My part is done. I ended the call. Then I got in my car and drove. A small diner about 20 miles outside Columbus. Somewhere quiet, somewhere anonymous. No sense being easy to find today. Over lunch, the news started breaking on local business blogs. Meridian Technologies, executives under investigation for financial irregularities. No names yet, but that wouldn't last long. 2 p.m. Robert Chen called. It's a bloodbath, he said, skipping any formalities. Brian confessed the moment we hit him with your report. He's trying to cut a deal, throwing Daniel under the bus, claiming he was pressured into it. And Daniel? Denying everything, playing dumb. Phillips is claiming he was just an external consultant with no financial oversight. I could almost hear Robert's smirk. Here. Board's not buying any of it. All 3 are suspended pending further investigation. We've hired forensic accountants. They start Monday. I leaned back in the booth watching the sunlight stretch across the window. Everything was unfolding exactly as it should, and it was only just beginning. Monday morning arrived. I walked into Meridian's headquarters wearing a suit I hadn't needed in years. The security guard did a double take, then quickly printed me a visitor badge. Welcome back, Mr. Wilson, he said, his voice tinged with newfound respect. The elevator ride to the executive floor was quiet. I'd never had reason to visit this level before. Now I was expected in the boardroom. Inside, 10 board members sat around a polished table. Robert Chen nodded slightly as I entered. The interim CEO, previously the COO, looked uncomfortable. Mr. Wilson, she began, her tone cautious. Thank you for coming. The situation you've brought to light is unprecedented. I stayed silent. I didn't need to say anything. The full extent of the fraud appears worse than initially reported, she continued. The forensic team has identified nearly $5.2 million in diverted funds. Criminal charges are being prepared. Still, I waited. Robert cleared his throat. Jake, the board has unanimously voted to create a new executive position, Chief Information Security Officer. Full executive privileges, reporting structure directly to the board. We'd like to offer you the role. I set my folder on the table in front of me. Inside, you'll find my conditions, I said. Non-negotiable. The CEO opened the folder, scanning through the pages quickly. Her eyebrows rose. Full audit authority across all departments. Independent budget veto power on financial technology decisions. I nodded once, watching her reaction. This is unusual, she said, glancing at the other board members. So was embezzling $5.2 million, I replied. That happened because no one was watching. Now someone will be. The room fell silent. You have until noon, I said, standing. I have other offers. As I turned to leave, Robert asked, Did you plan this all along, Jake? I paused at the door, glancing back. I didn't plan to be fired after 17 years. Everything after that was just me doing what I've always done, identifying system vulnerabilities and implementing appropriate security measures. At 11:47 a.m., they called. They'd accepted every condition. 6 months later, I sat in my new corner office, reviewing security protocols for the upcoming quarter. The view overlooked the Columbus skyline, a daily reminder of how much had changed. Brian Wilcox had pled guilty to multiple fraud charges. In exchange for his cooperation, he'd receive a reduced sentence. Still significant, but it was something. Daniel was fighting the charges, insisting he was unaware of the scheme, despite the overwhelming evidence. Jason Phillips had fled to Brazil but was being extradited. The money had been recovered, most of it anyway, enough that the company avoided serious financial damage. My former team now reported to me. I'd promoted Steven to run day-to-day operations. The kid had potential. He just needed someone to see it. A knock at my door drew my attention. Andrea stood there, smiling. Ready for lunch? She asked. I nodded, grabbing my jacket as we walked through the IT department. Conversations quieted briefly, not from fear but from respect. These people knew what had happened, knew I could have destroyed the company instead of saving it. In the elevator, Andrea squeezed my hand. Happy. I considered the question. The anger that had driven me those first few days after being fired had faded. What remained wasn't exactly happiness, more like satisfaction, completion. I'm good, I said. Outside, the October sun warmed our faces as we walked to a nearby restaurant. My phone buzzed with a message from Robert Chen. Board approved your security budget increase. Unanimous vote. I smiled slightly. No arguments, no questions. Just trust. Andrea noticed my expression. What is it? She asked. Nothing, I said, sliding the phone back into my pocket. Just thinking about bridges. Some collapse under their own weight. Others, once repaired, become stronger than they ever were before. I'd built this one right. This time, I'd built it to last.